thank you for joining us all. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's really great to have you here. I'm Jane Middleton. I'm the founder of the Labour Hunger Campaign, and I'm delighted to be chairing this joint event with the Fabian Society. Tonight, we're looking at families and food insecurity during coronavirus, because we know that as ever, people on low incomes are being hit hardest by the crisis. And what that means, distressingly, in real terms, is that sometimes people just cannot put food on the table. And we know that there are children who do not have enough to eat. And a particular concern is what is going to happen now that the summer holidays are coming up. So if you've not been to one of these events before, I'll just take you through the technology. We'll be hearing from our speakers first of all, but then we'll have plenty of time for questions. What you need to do is type in your questions on the Q&A function on Zoom. And you can look at the questions that other participants have put in, and you can vote for your favourite question, so those questions get asked. Then we'll just pick out the most popular questions. I ought to mention that this is being recorded, if you're happy with that. We're going to put a few links in the chat function. There'll be a link to join the Fabians, if you're not already a member. There'll be links to the Labour Hunger Campaign, and in particular to our latest campaign, which is to increase child benefit. I'm going to leave it to our panel to talk about what needs to be done to help families facing food poverty right now. But I just want to mention here that on the Labour Hunger Campaign website, we have a whole raft of measures that we want to see implemented to protect people on low incomes. We're campaigning specifically on increasing child benefit to £50 per child per week. This is a measure that will put money in the pockets of families who are struggling so they can access food and other essentials without having to rely on charity, or worse, without having to go hungry. We have a template letter you can send to your MP on the website, and we're currently setting up a petition. So you can sign up for news on our website, and when the petition is ready, we can send it through to you. Right, I'm going to turn to our speakers now. We're very lucky to have with us here tonight Kate Green MP, Kath Darmani of Sustain, and Councillor Amna Abdulatif. We're going to start with Kate. Kate has a long and distinguished record campaigning against poverty and inequality. She's been MP for Stretford and Urmston since 2010, and she's currently the Shadow Minister for Child Poverty Strategy. She has been Chief Executive of the Child Poverty Action Group and also Chair of the London Child Poverty Commission. Kate, I'm really looking forward to hearing your views about how we can tackle the problems around food insecurity and how we can support children in particular.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jane. I don't think anybody is going to be surprised by anything I'm going to say this evening. We know that the impact of the coronavirus crisis on low-income families has been particularly acute. The rise in the levels of child poverty already on track to go over 5 million over the next 2 to 3 years is likely to be exacerbated. IPPR suggested this week that an extra 200,000 children would fall into poverty as a result of the crisis. The rise in the demand for food parcels and the shocking figures published the other day by IFAN and by the Trussell Trust, showing in particular 107% increase in the number of parcels issued for children compared with the same month last year. And the fact that it is particularly certain families, including single parent families and BME families, where you're seeing the highest level of redundancies and where people are also being most likely to be furloughed, which means that they will be on, in most cases, only 80% of their usual wages. So pressure on parents and children is very, very severe in the COVID crisis. And that is undoubtedly leading to a rise in hunger, along with other aspects of poverty which are being experienced. The government obviously has put in some measures to try to help family incomes, including an increase in the standard allowance in universal credit. That's been not unhelpful, but it hasn't been sufficiently well targeted to reach families with children. And it's very obvious that more is going to need to be done to support those low-income families over the next few months, in particular over this summer, when children are going to lose access to the support through the voucher system to reach those who would be eligible for free school meals. And that's why Labour has been calling for the free school meals provision to be continued over the summer holiday. It's something that the Labour government in Wales has already committed to doing, and which we are pressing the Westminster government very hard to do too. Because fundamentally, in the end, food poverty is poverty. It's about families that don't have enough money to go and buy the nourishing foods that they need. We know that in those circumstances, it's parents who make sacrifices, mothers in particular, who go without to make sure that they look after their children as much as they possibly can. But it's an extremely dire situation, and so we need some immediate additional support from the government, particularly in the form of free school meals. But we've also suggested other immediate steps they ought to take to help families financially, including lifting the 2-child limit and the benefit cap that apply to those in receipt of universal credit. And also, as I say, very urgently committing to extending free school meals over the summer break. Longer term, a package of support for families with children that must include well-targeted support for parents to get back into decent jobs. That will probably require some sort of job guarantee scheme underwritten by the government. And also, of course, further measures to support family incomes through the social security system, which I'm sure people will want to discuss tonight.
I'll unmute. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you for your contribution. I'm really glad to hear you stressing that, you know, this is an immediate emergency, that people need immediate support. And you're absolutely right to highlight the awful impact of the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, because, you know, these are just punitive measures. And I know, for example, the government announced a small increase in universal credit, but of course, families who are suffering with the benefit cap won't even get that increase because their benefit is capped. So yeah, it's really important that we ditch those. Right. Our next speaker is Kath Dalmany, Chief Executive of Sustain. Sustain is the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, and I haven't known Kath for very long, but I've known her long enough to know that she's an absolute tour de force, and she fights tirelessly for food justice. She sustains Food Vulnerability Lead, I believe, during COVID-19. She helped establish its Right to Food initiative, which is based on the principle that food is a right, that people shouldn't access food by charity, it is a human right. And she's the driving force behind the recent move to force a judicial review of the government's decision to drop free school meals during the free school meals vouchers during the summer holidays, because they apparently think that hunger stops when the holidays start, and we know, of course, it doesn't. I'm sure that Kath will be telling you much more about this tonight. So over to you, Kath.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't think I've been called a tour de force before. I think I'm kind of driven by a kind of desperation during COVID, which is and a sense of responsibility, speaking on behalf of all those people that Kate Green's just described, who are suffering from both the indignity and the terrible inequity of hunger in a rich country during this crisis. So it's a national emergency and we can't even manage to feed our own children properly. It's really just so upsetting on so many levels. And of course, we're in the privileged position of being able to at least try and do something about it. But it's been a real uphill and shockingly uphill struggle to do so. It feels like we started with the richest first and helped them first, and then we got down to the poorest last. So it took until, I've just got in my notes here, until the end of April to get the government officially to recognise that financial hardship was a factor in hunger during the coronavirus lockdown, when we had been saying that that was a factor all the way through. So let me just describe what Sustain is, because it's an unusual sort of organisation. We're a charity, so I won't be party political here. Obviously, food and insecurity is deeply political, but not party political here, if I may. But we have our members, our frontline groups, so people like Fair Share, the Independent Food Aid Network, but we also work with a very large number of wider groups, especially during COVID, like the Red Cross, Trussell Trust, homeless groups, Age UK, those kind of people. So those people are really experiencing the front line of the suffering and people's desperation and their massive need for food. And it is massive. So, and it's very clearly about people who have physical problems getting the food. So you might have the money but not be able to get out to the shops. That is absolutely a thing, and I'm not going to deny that that's a massive issue. But for now, let's focus not on the people who have money, let's focus on the people who don't have the money to buy food. So the sheer scale of that issue suggests, from my colleagues at the Food Foundation, they say that about 200,000 children have gone without food during COVID. And as Kate said, we're likely to see a rise in that number as the job losses sink in, and the Resolution Foundation figures on that are quite shocking. So trying to get a sensible discussion about how we handle hunger in this country and make sure that every child gets at least one decent meal a day is probably going to occupy the rest of my working life. How do we do that in a sensible way? So my COVID experience has been a different sort of frontline. My experience has been mainly interfacing with local authorities, practitioners, government. I sit on various liaison groups with DEFRA. We've been writing letters to MPs, to ministers, trying to unpick what it is about our country that can't put children first, and doesn't address children's hunger first and foremost in a national emergency, let alone the rest of the year. Because of course, if you run out of food the rest of the year, that's an emergency for your household, isn't it? Even if it's not a national emergency, but perhaps it should be. If we can't feed our children properly, what on earth are we doing here? What is government for, after all? So whilst I said we're not being party political at the beginning, as I say, it's deeply political. So it took until the end of April to get recognition of financial hardship as a factor in food hardship. It took until yesterday to get crisis funds given out to local authorities to be able to respond. A £63 million fund has been allocated, not nearly enough, but it's a start. And it really has made me think about what are the structures, what are, you know, this group of people on this call, you're involved in councils and thinking about policy as well as practice on the front line. So what structures and legal responsibilities would genuinely have helped? So I tried to reflect on the last couple of months of liaising with government and local authorities to say what's been missing, what did we not have in our toolbox that we would have found useful? So I'm sorry this is quite so nerdy. I didn't expect to be talking like this 2 months ago, but looking at the Equalities Act, for example, the socioeconomic aspects of the Equalities Act were never enacted into law. So we haven't had that in our toolbox to be able to say these equalities must be addressed. Not that they just should because we're moral people, but because we as a culture have said it is a primary responsibility to address socioeconomic inequalities when we must. The welfare benefits system, it doesn't cover the basic costs of living. We've known that for years, but in a national emergency, it's absolutely essential that they do. Otherwise, people will have to turn to charity in desperation to get fragments of food to keep themselves going. So linking the level of the basic income, I'm not going to say universal basic income, I don't fully understand it yet, I'd love to know more, but to understand what would be a proper safety net, what would really genuinely be a decent, dignified minimum standard of living for people in the national emergency, but every day of the year as well. What responsibility should be on local authorities? So at the moment, local authorities are being asked to feed thousands and thousands of people a week. I mean, really thousands. There's one local authority I was speaking to yesterday in London who is spending £78,000 a week on food to put into parcels. This is quite alongside anything to do with schools. Where are they getting that money from? They can't draw that down as a new burden because there's no legal responsibility on local authorities. Robert Jenrick, who's the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government and responsible for local authority work during this time, said, very helpfully, anything it takes. The local authorities can have everything they need to solve these problems, comma, brackets, but only if there's a legal responsibility to do so and we're actually requiring you to do it from government level. So because they have never been required to ensure that people have enough food, there is no money attached to that responsibility. So perhaps we should be looking at statutory obligations on local authorities. I don't know if this is the right solution. I'm positing it to a group of people who may well have really good ideas on this. But a statutory obligation on local authorities, but the reason being because then they would have a right to draw down the funds to meet that statutory obligation. Because at the moment they are left high and dry without the cash. Until yesterday, a bit of cash has been given, 63 million quid for 3 months. Welcome, not enough. But also longer term, if we're really talking about recovery now, recovery should not involve lots of mothers having to go without food because they're feeding their kids. That recovery should not involve millions of children wondering where their next meal is coming from. It shouldn't not involve schools running short of cash to provide decent meals. So I think we should be looking much more at wealth and at asset distribution, and some of our assets being kitchens and land, and how that is part of feeding people, but also giving them the independence of dignified sources of food. And year-round adequacy of food and adequacy of income has to be the great, you know, alongside climate change, of course, but alongside some of the great tasks of our era. And I did, just as one final thing, partly because it felt really nerdy and technical before COVID, but I've realised how we've absolutely not managed without it, which is measurement of these things. I mean, I don't want to just say that measurement solves anything, but at the moment we've got an agriculture bill going through Parliament that asks, puts some statutory obligations on national government to measure national food security, but it doesn't measure household food security. And during COVID, we've spent days and days, and government has been spending days and days scrabbling for measurements of who's out there that needs support. Why don't we just know that? If we cared enough to want to make sure that people ate well and had enough money, then we would know how to find them, and we would know who would be in those categories. And we wouldn't have categories like no recourse to public funds. That just wouldn't exist. Or at least it wouldn't exist for children. How dare we have that in our country, that some children have to go hungry because they simply don't have enough money? So I started by saying I wasn't going to be political. Of course, it is deeply political. And I have to realise that too, because I neatly work in a corner on food. But of course, this is also about the money and also about the access to wealth and assets. So you asked me to speak about the big picture. It's a gigantic picture, food security for everyone in this country. And I really would welcome the kind of discussion that gives us hope for the future about fixing this, because it really can't be like this. Again, one of the things I'm grateful to for COVID is that it has shown up the cracks in our system. We can't go back to how we were before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kath. And yeah, I'm glad to hear you highlight that the solutions need to be political, because that's the only way we get structural change. And it needs to be national change, not sort of ad hoc patchwork at local level, I think. And, I'm here from the Labour Hunger Campaign. The Fabians is a political organisation. I would guess that most people watching this are political, and we have a responsibility. I think the Labour Party has a responsibility to put this issue at the forefront of everything it does, because what could be more important than making sure people have enough to eat? Before we move on to our next speaker, I'll just say, please put in your questions. We need lots of questions because we've got a brilliant panel, and I just know you'll get fantastic answers. We have some questions, but let's have some more. Over to Amna. Amna Abdul-Latif. I was lucky enough to meet Amna through the remarkable Fabian Women's Network Mentee Scheme. And if any of you here are women, I'm sure a lot of you are, and if you're Fabians or want to be Fabians, then you need to find out about the Fabian Mentee Scheme. It's absolutely brilliant. But I digress. Like Kate and Kath, Amna is one of those women who just gets things done. She's amazing. She's a community psychologist. She's the counsellor for Ardwick in Manchester, and she's currently the lead for children and young people for the domestic abuse charity Women's Aid. And when coronavirus hit, she kind of rolled up her sleeves and got out there and set up a mutual aid group to support vulnerable families in her area. So I'm hoping she's going to tell us a bit about that tonight. Over to you, Amna.
Thank you, Jane, and really interesting and insightful listening to Kate and Kath, because actually what I'm going to be talking about is a very localised response that we have had, particularly in Ardwick and Longsight, which are two central wards in the city of Manchester. And this came about really because as a local councillor who's relatively new, I was elected in 2019 last year, and kind of getting to know the area, although I've lived there all my life, but getting to know, the different organisations and groups that work and function and support people in the local area. I could see that there was a huge issue that's going to be unfolding with COVID and the lockdown. having travelled abroad well before the lockdown ever took place in the UK, and seeing just how countries were responding very quickly and not seeing the same in the UK. And that worried me greatly. And so when we went through lockdown, I could see that some of our food pantries, our food banks were closing, mostly because many of the volunteers were in the shielding groups, and so couldn't any longer kind of function in the same way that they did. But also those that were able to continue just did not have, because of the panic buying, did not have food to actually give out to people, even if they wanted to continue supporting. And so there was a huge reduction in, I guess, being able to respond to the needs of local people at that time. And so I set up the mutual aid group because it was mentioned to me that there wasn't one in my local area. Others had been set up across GM and across the country. And so it started off just as a Facebook page, and I had no idea what we were going to be doing exactly. But it has since blossomed massively. And, we have supported over the last few months, at least 3,000 people, if not more, in the local area. This, in my head, when we started the mutual aid group, I thought this needed to be a very local response. It needed the local volunteers who have been active, who already support people, either through their faith communities, through the different charities that they have, but also through the private sector organizations that function in the local area. And so I just started having conversations with people. We ended up setting up a WhatsApp group that's now, I don't know how many people are on it, but it's a whole heap of different people offering different kinds of support. So we had, initially we had a website made. We ended up having to set up a phone line that was very local to Ardwick and Longsight, that local people can call. And this is in light of also Manchester City Council also having a line for people to access support. But what we found was that a lot of people wanted much more localized support and instant support. So we were finding that many people, for instance, didn't have any food in their house, and so couldn't wait 2 days until they were processed through a system to then receive food. And what we were trying to do was we started looking at donations from various housing providers that function in the local area. I started a GoFundMe page, some others started GoFundMe pages, and we started to source our own income and generate it in order to be able to start purchasing food and support through a much wider system of people who had investment in the local area. Either they lived here or they worked here or they had organizations or charities in this local district. And that's what kind of kicked things off. And we were able to provide people with food within less than 24 hours most of the time. If you rang, during the day, you would receive your food parcel that afternoon. And what we were very conscious with was that Ardwick and Longsight is a very diverse part of the city. 70% at least of the population of both those wards is BAME, and very diverse BAME communities, in terms of, that there's Asian communities, Somali, African, Arab, very different types of communities that exist in this area. And so we wanted to make sure that what we were giving them was things that they do want to eat and things that they can actually make a meal with, that it wasn't just a case of just giving people food to just survive, but that actually they, it's things that they're used to in their regular diet. And so we asked questions, and I think it was a bit of a, just checking what was going well and then learning and adapting and changing. And I think some of the learning that we found was that the ability to make quick decisions, to be adaptable, to respond to need instantly through the volunteers and problem solve as a group. When we came across any issues, we were able to come together and think, well, how do we deal with this now? And that has been incredibly important in terms of how the mutual aid group was able to support local residents. And being really conscious in reflecting about who is in our community, who's missing, who haven't we maybe got around the table, who needs that additional support that we're maybe not seeing. And still, even though we've been going now for about 2 months, there are still gaps in the, in people that I think probably still need support that are just not getting access to it. And I think, the question that popped up that I saw earlier around, particularly for disabled people, this has become a really big issue, because actually not only do you not have access necessarily to food, you're not able to get out yourself because of various health conditions and issues, and the fact that actually you're queuing up for hours initially when the lockdown happened, but also that social care has had to reduce its support level to many disabled residents, and so we were having to respond quite quickly through the organisations, particularly within the statutory sector that were part of the group, to be able to support those individuals, because what we didn't want to do was use volunteers to do really sensitive work when they've not been trained to do such. So the volunteers were there to do the packing, the phone line volunteering, as well as the delivery of food parcels. But when it came to kind of more sensitive issues, we were signposting and looking at other organisations that work locally to respond to that need. And for us, the dignity and agency of our families was really key, wanting to make sure that what we were providing wasn't something that was taking anything away from those families, or having to feel like they were, having to beg for food almost sometimes through other organisations. It was really important to us, and so we were looking at doing voucher schemes. So with the money that we have, buying vouchers to supermarkets for families that can do their own shopping and are able to go out. That's not been as much as the number of families who are calling in because they are shielding or aren't able to physically go out and do their own shopping. We've also seen a really positive impact in terms of, those that are volunteering during this time has been on them. Those that are on furlough, but also those that have lost their jobs, or even those that have used the support that's offered by the mutual aid group, wanting to give back. So coming to the group and volunteering, I can do some packing. I know that, I need this support as well, but I also can help out. And that's something that's been amazing in terms of the flourishing of seeing how the volunteers are reacting at this time and wanting to help. But there are numerous challenges that we face that we are trying to resolve in terms of, older people, particularly who have digital issues in terms of, no phones, no radio, no computer access. How do we deal, and how do we support them? And that has been often, neighbours' intelligence mostly being supported. So people going and knocking on people's doors and asking if they need anything, because they know that there's somebody who's potentially vulnerable in their street or in their local area. And that has been immensely beneficial, but that's only been because we initially started with those local residence groups, those local organizations, people who live locally in the area, who are able to then give that intelligence, because as Kath mentioned, there isn't any way of us finding out who actually needs this support and who doesn't. And so, without us having to go out and actually ask people to be able to respond, there was no way of knowing who needed that additional support and whether they knew what was on offer for them. We've seen, obviously, the disproportionate impact, particularly on BAME people in our community, those that have both lost income, lost jobs, but also those who are key workers who did not feel very well supported going back into the workplace, or having to continue to work through the worst part of the COVID lockdown. And I think that's been a huge issue for us to know how to respond to that. People with no recourse to public funds, those in temporary free accommodation, homeless, women fleeing domestic violence, you know, all of these things not really be, you know, these can be addressed at a local level, but really need huge changes at national level for us to be able to do more. And what we've been able to do is that, you know, none of the support that we offer is based on what somebody's situation is. Even if somebody is working but maybe has lost an part of the income, and having that food support just allows them to save some money for the gas bill, and if you're a person who with no recourse to public funds, and we're able to provide you with, you know, food support and a hot meal because you are living in a place where, you know, there isn't access for you to cook anything, we can do that. And so we've not been, I guess, bound as a mutual aid group, as a non-registered entity in a sense, by any of these titles, I guess, that we put on individuals. But also seeing the kind of, you know, huge complex picture. You know, food insecurity is only one part of a really very complex picture in our communities since COVID. We've had numerous families coming forward in terms of, you know, talking about depression, loneliness, anxiety, both for adults and children, and not knowing, you know, what to do, how to support their children, how to get out of this situation when everyone is in a lockdown state. And so we have thought about different ways. I mean, we did Eid parcels over the last month, specifically because a lot of our callers that require support are from Muslim communities, providing cakes and sweets and balloons and things like that that would just at least bring a smile to children's faces during the Eid period under lockdown. And that was hugely successful initiative that we did. And we're also thinking about how we can do the same now for summer, not only providing food parcels for families and food vouchers for those that are able to go out and buy their own food, but also activities, how to occupy children, how to do things as a community together and participate in activities, but also what can be done at home in families to be able to support one another. And I guess, you know, I guess for me, the biggest learning has been that, you know, at a local response, we need place-based approaches at local level that respond to people's needs and people's intelligence to understand what is needed in their local community, who needs that support, what's missing and where the gaps are. And I think it worries me when I hear various politicians talk about, you know, just going back to business as usual, or talking about change, but not really considering what that change might look like. And I think we really need to be thinking now that things aren't going to go back to normal, and they shouldn't be going back to normal, because as Kath highlighted, what has been shown is actually that for many people, they have been so disproportionately impacted. And it's not just COVID, it is a general issue of inequality across our society that has been there for years. And I think we really need to be reflective of that to ensure that we do end up with a more equitable country for all of us to be living in. And, you know, for us now, we're talking already about how we move forward. You know, how do we make what the mutual aid group has started as a sustainable way of working in local communities that has brought so many people together. And, you know, for us, this is already conversations about, you know, good neighbours schemes and transitioning, but also how, you know, we can ensure that people are able to look after themselves and those around them in the way that we've been able to do, and being able to respond quickly and adapt to changing needs. And that's it really from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I've lost my video. Katie behind the scenes. I don't know if you can get me back on. Hello, Katie. Anyway, I will continue with that video for the moment. Yeah, Anna, there is so much of interest there. There's so much that we could, I think I'm back. Yeah, thank you, Anna. There's so much of interest there, and I can see questions flooding in on that. So many things to pick up on. You mentioned no recourse to public funds. You know, I think we could and probably should have a whole event on that topic alone, the question of people with no recourse to public funds. You mentioned dignity, treating people with dignity. I mean, this is at the core, I think, of the whole question of how we expect people to access food now. And clearly, if people are left without enough food. There's very little dignity there. But I'm going to move on to the questions. I'm going to turn first to Mark Bryant. I'm going to take questions in twos and pass them over to our panellists. And when I come to you, then you will be unmuted behind the scenes and you can ask your question. So Mark Bryant, are you?
Yes, I'd like to know how we get to support to disabled people who have needs that aren't necessarily financially. You know, a lot of the speakers earlier were talking about the financial side of things, but disabled people may have trouble getting transport to access to transport to shops, or may not be able to, maybe blind, may not be able to socially distance because they can't see how far away people are and things like that. So there's all types of different aspects for disabled people over and above the financial. And I just wonder if there are any thoughts about how you can address those different needs.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. I'll take questions two at a time. So I know we had a question submitted early from Angie Sowton. Angie, are you there? Are you happy to ask your question?
Yes, I'm here. I was asking, will local councils ring fence the 63 million announced by the government for welfare assistance to feed their communities? And will it be enough to ensure that no family goes hungry this summer?
Excellent, thank you. Two really good questions there. Kath, I'm going to go to you on the question of getting support to disabled people who might have problems just accessing transport, for example. So I'll start with you on that one, and then please, by all means, go straight on and answer the question about the 63 million extra pounds to local councils and whether that is ring fence. I suspect.
Yes, because I've just come off a call with DEFRA about it, so I'm
excellent.
details. So in terms of disability, and indeed anybody who has difficulty of the more physical access to food, so that might be older people, disabled people, people who are sick or not shielded so much, but they're self-isolating, or, you know, there's quite a lot of different people in that situation who really struggle. Now, in theory, the local authority should have set up a helpline which triages the need according to, but it varies very much by local authority, I'm afraid. So there hasn't been a kind of requirement of exactly what that should look like. It's been invented slightly on the hoof and rather underfunded. But in a good local authority, there should be a helpline. You should be able to call up and say, I have trouble getting to the shop. Can you pair me with a volunteer, or help me with getting a supermarket slot, or other schemes like that? And it ought to be the case that the very last resort is to refer to a food bank, because that obviously is not the ideal situation at all. So there ought to be dignified responses being built into the triage and response system at local authority level, but by no means perfect, I'm afraid. Some areas like Greenwich have been doing an amazing job, and some other areas, I won't name them, are a bit more patchy. In terms of the 63 million quid that was released yesterday, under much duress, I have to say, partly under the threat of litigation, I have to say, the 63 million quid is going out to local authorities, as I understand it. There's not much detail yet. It was only announced last night and quite last minute. It will be divided according to the need across local authorities. So I think local authorities have to demonstrate what the need is. So we worked out it's about £420,000 per top tier local authority. Which isn't very much. It sounds like a lot to the general public, but actually we know that'll be mopped up quickly. So I spoke to my chum at Liverpool City Council, who said to feed all children during the summer holiday would cost them 1.7 million quid. So if they only got, say, a couple of £100,000, that's actually not going to go very far. And they've already spent £1 million on food for children during COVID so far. So they're getting quite skint now. That's a technical term, obviously. So it's one of those things. It's like a drop in a very large ocean of need. So there's lots of detail about how it might be played. There were loads of questions on the call this afternoon, as you might imagine, because there were 73 voluntary and community sector organisations on the call, all asking questions about eligibility criteria. Do people with no recourse to public funds, can they apply to these welfare assistance grants? You know, are there even welfare assistance programs in some local authorities? Because they've often been disbanded or brought down to almost minimal level in some areas. Some areas very high functioning and very good, and it'll be up and running very quick. But the money in theory ought to be flowing by the middle of July. And I think they've written temporary all over it, because the government doesn't want to be committed to paying for this longer term. So I don't know what temporary means yet, but I think it's 3 months. They seem to be thinking in 3-month chunks at the moment. So inadequate, patchy, better than nothing, but not much better than nothing. But we are grateful that DEFRA civil servants have been helping quite a lot behind the scenes to make that happen. I am grateful to them for trying. And as I say, even getting the government to admit that financial vulnerability was a thing has been a long, hard slog by a lot of organisations doing a lot of shouting, working behind the scenes, because it's a big, expensive thing to respond to. But of course, as a civilised country, we blooming well ought to be responding properly.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you so much. Amna, I'm going to go over to you now on the question of supporting people with disabilities.
Yeah, I think Kath really answered it. I mean, in Manchester, the helpline is really the first port of call for anyone who needs support with collection of medication, shopping, food parcels. It covers a whole range of different things, and you're just signposted to the relevant people to be able to respond to your needs. I don't know what that looks like elsewhere, but it's, you know, some of it is definitely working in Manchester really well. I know that I've picked up a number of cases in terms of casework where I've done people's shopping because they've not been able to go out, etc. I think there has been, you know, quite a positive response to that. That's not to say that everyone is being picked up or that that support is, you know, what's needed, because I am sure that there are many disabled people across the city who are probably not knowing where to go to for help, and particularly since a lot of them access to social care have been very patchy and lower than what they would be expecting normally. But there is, you know, there is that support in Manchester at the very least, and I would think that most councils would have some form of support for disabled residents.
Thank you, Amna. Kate, do you want to add anything on that, particularly perhaps the question of the funding for local councils?
Local councils are in an absolutely desperate position. The funding that they have received since the crisis began has been very far short of what they have needed to support their residents. And we have to remember that the crisis comes on top of a long period of austerity when local authority funding has been reduced by 40 or 50% over the last 10 years. And so services were already pared back to the bone, and now demand is increasing massively. But the funding is not keeping up with the level of need. And it's a very, very real worry that local authorities are going bankrupt. The shortfall in their funding is very, very serious indeed. And the government, I feel, has not really woken up to the scale of the challenge, the problem that we have in local government now, that during the crisis, as I think Kath was saying earlier, local authorities were first told, spend whatever you need, we will make sure that your costs are covered. That then became spend what you must if you're obliged to, and we won't be reimbursing you for any lost revenue. And a lot of local authorities run a business model where actually, because of the cuts they've experienced over the last decade, means that they need to rely very heavily on commercial revenue from things like parking, owning shopping malls or leisure centres or whatever it is. So the situation is absolutely dire in local government, and it's a huge tribute to local authorities that they have kept the show on the road and worked to meet need. But this is but we are sitting on a ticking time bomb here in terms of how local provision is going to continue as we continue through the emergency and begin to come out of the other side. And the provision of money for things like helping people with their council tax bills, or now helping them with emergency payments for food or to pay bills or whatever it is, are really just a drop in the ocean in terms of the resources that local authorities need to support their communities. So I think we have to be pushing government very, very hard indeed about the scale, the sheer horror of what we are looking at now for local government. I don't think they are acknowledging that at all, and it's very, very serious indeed. And we know that it is the most vulnerable people who will fall off the edge if resources are overstretched. They will fall below the radar. They won't know how to access support, especially if support is provided online. They'll find that harder. So I think we have to be extremely concerned about the situation for local government now and making a big political priority of putting pressure on government to address that.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think what's clear from what both you and Kath have said is the enormity of the problem, the size of the problem, and just the sheer difficulty of getting government to recognise that there is this problem there, just getting them to see what we can all see. So yeah, the more pressure, the better. I'm going to turn to Anna Smith and then Sarah Batty. So Anna, I can see you there. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Unmute. Right, now you can hear me, I think. My name's Anna Smith and I'm Deputy Leader of Cambridge City Council and Executive Councillor for Communities, and I'm also a Fabian mentee, which is a wonderful programme and I really recommend it. We've tried to do as much as we can. We're a district council, we've got a very small budget. We've tried always to have money in budgets for food hubs, we've ring-fenced money for community grants, and we've put a really kind of intensive program in place for this time. There's been huge efforts across the whole city, from mutual aids, from charities, from voluntary groups, and conservative estimates suggest that we've already distributed around 20 tonnes of food across the city, not counting all the local food banks, and we aren't even responsible for giving out shielded food parcels because we're a district council. I mean, the pressure on councils and on charities and voluntary groups is huge, and there's no sign that this is letting up. We're getting more and more people needing food all the time. We're finding people with absolutely nothing in their cupboards that we are needing to feed. So really it's following on the last question, is I'd love to hear a bit more about what we're doing as a Labour Party to really try and put pressure on the government, who quite frankly don't seem to care. And how we can, as councils, add our voice to this in a really powerful way, because this is an enormous crisis and we need to make sure it's properly funded.
Thank you, Anna. That's great. Sarah Batty, are you there? Can we have your question?
Hiya there, Jane. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. I'm a welfare rights advisor, so I specialise in the benefit system and speak to people on a daily basis who are trying to navigate the system and claim benefits and have that experience. And it's just frustrated me for so many years that the Labour Party has shied away from talking about the actual level of benefits. So of course we are demanding urgently that the very most barbaric cuts, such as the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, be reversed, and we have been calling that for that for some time. But why aren't we calling for benefits to be raised? Why can't we have that honest conversation with the public about what it does take for a decent standard of living? It certainly isn't £74 a week. That the uproar about the level of statutory sick pay that people that we read in the press, as welfare rights advisors, you know, that people said, how can one possibly live on £94 a week? And we were spitting our tea out, because people have been living on £44 a week if they were on £74 a week with deductions. Cash money has to be the main way to address poverty. And just as a second issue, because council tax has just been mentioned and the huge challenges for local authorities in collecting it and for people for paying it, why doesn't Labour just come out and call for the abolition of council tax and its replacement with a much fairer system of taxation? If there's any time we could be calling for that, it's now, during a massive crisis.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah and Anna. Kate, I think those two are pretty much for you to answer. So first of all, what are we doing in the Labour Party to put pressure on government? And secondly, the question of welfare. We all know that benefits aren't enough to live on. can Labour be just a lot more upfront about this, and you know, maybe change the dialogue around the welfare state and make people understand that, you know, people do need a decent standard of living whether they're in work or not. So over to you, Kate.
Okay, so Anna, I think in Parliament, my colleagues, people like Annalisa Dodds, the Shadow Chancellor, Steve Reid, the Shadow Communities Secretary, Becky Long-Bailey, Shadow Education Secretary, are trying to push the government very hard and to be very practical in what they're suggesting to the government, to focus on measures that can be taken that would make an immediate difference on the ground to people, families who are struggling now. But I think you ask a really good question about what can councillors do. And I think there's a real opportunity through the Local Government Association, particularly because we know all councils and councillors will be experiencing these appalling pressures, to try to see if we can develop a cross-party voice, to get Conservative councils too highlighting just the incredible pressures that they are coping with on behalf of their residents. Many MPs, Conservative MPs, will know that in their local communities, families are struggling. So I think brigading voices that they listen to, their own councillors, their faith leaders, their community leaders, to go and talk to their MPs and say, this is the hardship that is being experienced, is going to be really important, so that the government gets a sense of pressure from within, if you like. As well as from those of us on the Labour side saying more is needed, you've got to do more. But I think we are the public are getting that impression. They know that there's a lot of alarm and uncertainty and hardship. People generally feel very insecure about the future and about their families. And so I think Sarah's question is a really interesting one about what story do you tell to use this crisis as an opportunity to begin to build public support for a more generous welfare state. Now, I was saying this 10 years ago in the financial crash. Oh, this will be a great chance to reduce inequality and the public will really get it and we should take advantage of this chance. And none of it happened. And in fact, what we got was 10 years of austerity, and we're in a worse position now than we were even then. So I think we mustn't let the chance slip through our fingers this time to tell a different story, to be in a different conversation with the public. I think it's crude, frankly, to talk about, oh, we've got to put benefits up, or people can't live on £74 a week. Numbers quickly turn people off. We need an emotional engagement with people about the kind of lives they want for themselves, for their families, the way we support people to support themselves. Most people don't want to be claiming benefits. They want to be working, earning to support their families, but they recognise that they have additional costs that we collectively ought to help them to meet, including the cost of raising their children, of disability, if they live in high housing cost areas, and so on. And I think one of the great things we learned from when we were in government is that when you have a model like tax credits offered, where lots and lots of families are in receipt of something, they become much, much more supportive of the idea of a payment that they're receiving that other people can receive too. But there isn't a quick fix to this. I've been round and round this lap of how do you get the public on side for a more generous social security system. In the end, actually, I'm not sure how much you ever can. I think what you really need is a Labour government that's just bold enough to say in power, we're going to do this and get on with it. And that's what we did when we were in government last time. And we really need to concentrate on getting ourselves back into government so we can do it again.
Excellent, thank you. And do you want to come back to Anna on the question of what we're doing in the Labour Party?
Well, I thought I had said that,
sorry.
That my shadow cabinet colleagues are doing a great deal, but I do think it's very important that we do now, particularly through the LGA, but also trying to get as many local councillors right across the country and in authorities of different political colour to be having their say too. Excellent,
great. Anna and Kath, I don't know if you want to come in very briefly on those two questions, and then we'll try and squeeze in just a couple more questions before the end. So if you have anything to add, Kath shaking her head. Anna, anything? No? Okay. So yeah, if we can just have two more quick questions. I'm going to go to Kelly Grehan and then Rosemary Sansome. So Kelly, do you want to kick off with your question?
Yes, I'm a councillor in Kent, and I'm very concerned about those families that are going to have their free school meals stopped for the summer and how they're going to manage. And I'm looking into what we can do as a community to support them, and, you know, working with people that run food banks and churches and so on. But my real worry is about the stigmatization and the kind of loss of dignity for any families that have to sort of seek out that help. So I'm really looking for sort of good practice and good ideas of how people can access these sort of services without having to kind of feel like they are begging or failing, or just really looking at ways to remove the stigma of seeking help for food poverty.
I'm on mute, keep doing that. Sorry, I was on mute. Rosemary, over to you, Rosemary Sansome. Do we have Rosemary? No, doesn't look as if we've got Rosemary. Okay, I'm going to go to Kath and ask you.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Rosemary, you're there. Okay, fine. Can you ask your question, please?
I didn't realise about the unmute.
Oh, right, okay.
I heard today about someone whose food voucher was refused by a supermarket. And I just wondered, I don't know much about food vouchers, but are they valid at all supermarkets? And what can we do if a supermarket chain is refusing to accept them?
Okay, so Kath, if you could answer the point about dignity, and also I know you know a lot about the whole system of supermarket vouchers, so I'm going to go over to you on those.
Very quickly on supermarket vouchers, there's only certain of the mainstream brands that take them, so it depends which supermarkets they are. If the organisers of this meeting want me to be put in touch with you directly, I'll try and get you to the right person who knows exactly how those work. And then we can find out if the supermarket you're talking about is the one that is or isn't part of that scheme. But you're quite right that they should have been available in everywhere. And I've failed to understand why the vouchers were valid in Waitrose for people on a low income, but weren't valid in Aldi. I mean, absolutely ridiculous from the start. Anyway, but well, if we can help you, we will. In terms of dignified, nutritious, accessible food for children over the summer holiday, or well, and the money to be able to purchase that, whether that's by the families themselves or by the schools or by the holiday schemes. So some schemes will be available over the holidays in 17 local authorities who've got money through the what's it called, Holiday Activity Fund, but that's all been decided and allocated already, so nobody can apply for that. But 17 local authorities will be running holiday activity programs that incorporate some food provision. It doesn't necessarily meet nutrition standards or quality standards, but it's there as a one thing. But we've been saying that kind of thing should be normal, and I think there are some people on this call. I've noticed Robbie Davidson, who does fantastic nutritious meals for people in local area who are struggling otherwise in a dignified way. I think that's the kind of vision we want to be getting to, is where food is provided and over the holidays included, so that children have access to a good meal every single day, whatever their socioeconomic background, then that should be integrated into policy. Obviously, that's the vision of where we want to go to, and that would be routinely funded. And I think that there's loads of kitchens in this country that could be participating in that, and then we could reinstate Meals on Wheels services that would have dignified entitlement access for older people who are stuck at home every day of the year, not just during COVID, so that they have that reliable supply of dignity, social service, connection, mental health support, friendship, you know, all the things that actually go together to make a good life. Now, if we put that centre stage as our vision of where we want to get to, we could be having sensible conversations about how to finance that, how to organise it, who to find in the local community who wants to run it, and make sure they're paid a good wage to deliver it. So this isn't all about charity and voluntary sector, because nobody wants food banks to continue. This should not be the future. It's a wonderful, kind response to absolutely appalling need. So, but the vision is hard, isn't it? How do we get there has come up quite a lot in the questions as well. And somebody said, why aren't the media covering this very much? Absolutely, it's driving me crazy trying to get this stuff into the media, because actually, and I've talked to lots of journalists, I've said, why is this story not bigger? And they say it tends to be treated as a kind of shopping problem. And the journalists are quite middle class, so they're not experiencing that themselves. And They always want to have a family who are actually starving on the street to be able to talk to them about the experience, or worse, in COVID, a middle-class family who's just lost their income so they can say how dreadful it is to be on low income. So not really talking to people about the everyday experience of grinding poverty day after day. And that doesn't get onto the media for really structural wrong reasons. And anybody's got an answer to that, I'd love to find it. But in the last few weeks, one of the responses I've come around, I'm very angry about how little has been thought about holiday hunger coming up. So one of the things we've come to in the last few weeks is to actually take the government to court for it, because I can't see how we'll make things happen at pace for this summer. I don't want to be in court. It's a last resort kind of thing to do. But we've been working with the Good Law Project, who are these very nice public interest lawyers, to say, how can a government during a national emergency cancel food vouchers for children when we know children are going to go hungry? We've showed them the figures of how many are hungry already. How outrageous. So I'm going to come off this call and onto a call with some lawyers to say, are we continuing that case in the light of the 63 million quid or not? Is 63 million quid enough to well, it isn't, is it? So, but obviously legal stuff is very nitpicky about exactly whether or not we can continue with that. But I think we have to put our money where our mouth is in terms of saying, if we really care about this, and I really do, every child should have high quality food every single day, then we have to step up and get political and legal about this, and also work out what the structures are, where the finance is coming from, and really make that work both at national level and at local level.
Thank you so much, Kath. Yeah, I mean, I know you've got a crowdfunder in place to support your legal challenge to the government. We've put the address, I think the address has been put in the chat. If not, we'll make sure it's up there so people can donate.
Can I also mention, just to be absolutely clear, that is not a crowdfunder for Sustain, so we won't get a penny of that. That is to show the court that we've done our best to raise the money to cover legal fees, because they're very expensive. So we're trying to get 20 grand. And that would help us to get a cost capping order in the court case. So that would go towards the court case costs, not to Sustain. We're in it to try and help those kids. We're not in it to raise money.
Yeah, and I think the importance of a legal challenge is you can establish a principle with a legal challenge. We need to establish the principle that children can't just be left to go hungry, particularly when the government knows that there's a problem, and of course they know there's a problem. But anyway, Amna, we're out of time, but if you have anything to say on the question of feeding people with dignity, because, you know, clearly you're making huge efforts to do that in your community, and I know you mentioned the importance of giving people appropriate food for their dietary needs, for their religious needs, and I know that's been a problem with the food passes that the government has sent out to people who are being shielded. They're not always appropriate. So yeah, if you could just very briefly come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, I think what type of food you're providing, and I think Robbie Davidson, you know, mentions the number of food that's just thrown, and actually whether they're healthy anyway, and whether they sustain people through this crisis. And I think for us, I mean, we've been lucky that, you know, we've been purchasing food essentially, and we've been purchasing it based on what people are saying that they would like and need in order to be able to cook decent meals for their families. And so, you know, through the phone line, what we do is that the volunteers take down what people are asking for, so that we're not sending food that is just going to be thrown away or that people don't really want or need. And so, you know, we kind of have like almost like a shopping list, and we do our best to try and cater to that shopping list. I mean, within reason, because obviously, you know, we've only got small amounts of money, but I think that's the way that we've been able to maintain some of that dignity. But also we are purchasing just supermarket vouchers. We've had that donated to us. We've had various other people coming forward with, you know, new ways of, you know, trying to at least support families. And I think that's been, you know, the connections with groups, you know, has been what has meant that we've understood better what our communities need, and how we can make sure that what we're offering is as dignified a process as possible. And I think we all need to be consciously really thinking about how we do this going forward over the summer particularly.
Thank you so much, Amna. And we've gone slightly over time. There's so many good questions coming in. I'm afraid we just haven't got time for them all. Hopefully you might be able to approach our panellists on Twitter, ask them via Twitter if the panellists are open to that. I hope they will be. You can always ask the Labour Hunger campaign on Twitter as well, and we'll do our best to field your questions and get an answer for you. But thank you for so many positive contributions tonight. And you know, there's clearly so much work to be done. We're facing a mountain here, but we've got to get this work done. We cannot go on seeing children and families going hungry. So, you know, let's all work in our communities like AMNA is doing, and campaign at a national level like Kath is doing, and support what Kate is doing in Parliament as well. You know, this is going to be a joint effort, and we've all got to be pulling in the same direction. The only thing I want to say quickly is, you know, food is, as we've already stated, a human right. And when we have conversations with people on social media, in our communities, with our friends and our relatives, let's talk about food justice, not about taking charity to people, but about taking justice to people. Let's fight for justice in our society. So join the Fabians if you're not already a member. Support the Labour Hunger Campaign. Please access the letter on our website to write to your MP about the importance of raising child benefit to a meaningful amount to lift families out of hunger. Please support Sustain's campaign to challenge the government on taking away free school meals during the summer. And if you have a look on Sustain's website, I think the address is on the chat. If you have a look on the website, there are really brilliant resources there for supporting local and national campaigning. So in my own community, I lobbied the council for a food poverty action plan. I got everything I needed to do that from Sustain's, and we now are getting a food poverty action plan put in place where I live. So thank you, Sustain, for that. Thank you to Kate, to AMNA, and to Kath is holding up a smiley face there. I don't think you can all see that. Thank you so much to Kate, to AMNA, and to Kath. You've been absolutely superb panelists. And thank you to everyone for joining us here tonight. Once again, I'm so sorry we couldn't take all your questions. Thank you so much. Take care and goodbye. Thank you, everyone.